Welcome to the presentation on correcting the air system on a 2000 Safari Continental. This would be similar for other coaches that use air over hydraulic. So what that means is the hydraulic brakes are used to stop the coach, and the air system is used for the park brake and airbags and so forth. So this is not for an air brake system. That's a much more complex system than this. One of the problems that I encountered was the air gauge on the dash quit working. When I took it apart, I could see there was oil and water in the instrument. And I'd been draining the tanks fairly consistently through the engine service bay. Once the oil and water gets in there, the gauge is ruined. As far as I know, there's no way to correct the gauge. So I bought a new gauge and I started going through the system to test each of the lines, and here's what I found. So this is a service bay. You can see there's 3 air outlets. 2 on the right are for the wet and dry sections of the air tank to bleed the air off the tank and discharge the air. The one on the left supposedly is used to fill tires or run an air tool or whatever. However, you'll see the problem here when we look at the next slide. At some point in time, and this has happened on a lot of this coach, someone turned this over to a bunch of technicians in an RV lot. I think what they did was they replaced the original fittings, which were simply a ferrule fitting with a crimp connector onto the line, and then pressure fit to that ferrule onto the back of the the coupler, because all these are push to fit fittings, which is a really good fitting. However, they didn't have enough knowledge to put it together properly. On the right hand side, you can see there's a 1/4 inch line going to what would be that air coupler to run a tire or a tool, and a 1/4 inch line is not enough air capacity. Plus, you'll see in the next slide that what they've done is they've taken a T connection off the bottom of the tank. The furthest side away where you can see the trees, that is the wet side. That's the side that gets fed with air from the compressor. Then there's probably a baffle plate system inside that tank, and then on the nearest side is what is called the dry side. And the bottom of those 2 bottom fittings are supposed to be drains for that tank. That's where you take the water that condenses in the tank. Now, on a system that has air brakes, there'd be air filters and dryers and all sorts of stuff in there, because you don't want water getting into the tank and the system and so forth. So this is a manual system where you're supposed to manually drain it through those 2 valves in the engine bay. Of course, that spews oil and water, and what makes a mess out of the whole engine bay. But that being as it is, that's the way they did this. But these T connections don't just go to the engine bay, they go to the air gauge and the horns and the step. So they've taken off the bottom of the tank where the water and oil collects an air feed into the instrumentation on the dash, and then the devices that they're trying to control with air. I mean, this is incompetent. So what I did was, and here's the top view of the tank. At the back end of the tank, where that thick line is, that is the air braid 1/2 inch line that comes from the compressor running off the back of this cat engine. It's a Bendix compressor, and it goes into that tank. Now this is actually, I phoned Cat, I found out that this thing actually produces a lot of airflow. Produces, if the person that told me this is correct, and he works for Cat and looked it up, it's 13.4 cubic feet per minute. That's a lot of air. I have an air compressor that I can run fairly large air tools with. It's only about 7 cubic feet per minute. This thing is double that capacity. What they did at the back end of the tank, there's 2 more lines that go off of there, so they've taken the air supply off the wet side. And the reason they did that is, if you look at the big air intake for the engine here on the nearest side, that was the easiest place at the back end to hook up a fitting. This is just incompetence that's hard to imagine. The 2 nearest lines that you see there are the 2 3/8 inch lines that go to the airbags. And then they've stuck a 1/4 inch line at the nearest front that goes, I'm not sure where that one goes. So what I did was, rather than follow this system, I made a manifold up. And I just used 1/2-inch galvanized pipe and push-to-fit fitting. So on the far side of this, you can see that's a 3/8 inch connection. There's 2 of them. And then there's the 2 T's I took off the tank. Those are for 1/4 inch lines. There's a 1 angle T at the bottom, and then the forward part is another T. So that is to replace all of the direct tank fittings. So here is the tank when I did the check on the line. So what I did was I wanted to make sure that all the lines were working correctly and there was no breaks or leaks, massive leaks in this thing. So using these push-to-fit fittings, you can loop the lines back on themselves, and that's what you see here, in order to isolate the lines and test them one at a time. It took probably 2 days to do this because you have to charge the tank and then let it bleed down, and I didn't use the engine. At the rear of the coach, I put another coupling so I could feed air from my shop compressor into that tank without running the engine, and that's how I tested the system. So that's what all these wires are in the thing hanging down like that. And off the front of the tank, that line you see coming off, that was the one line that they had correct, which goes to the emergency park brake. That goes up to the driver's console and then back to the brake that goes around the drive shaft. And here's a drawing that I did of the way the system is now. So the green line that you can see there where it says wet and dry, that's the 2 sections of that big tank you see hanging down. So the engine compressor, the red line, the large line, drives the air into the wet tank. Then what I did was I went out of the dry side on a 3/8 inch fitting and into just a relatively inexpensive water oil filter that you put on a regular compressor. The reason I didn't go off the main compressor line was money. It costs about $300 or $400 for a full system, and I wasn't too concerned about the airbags, if they're hooked up correctly, getting water in them since they're rubber. So anyway, it goes out of the water filter, and from the water filter it goes up into that black top right symbol, which is the manifold. And then we'll look at that. So from the manifold, you can see it goes out to the blue line. So those are the 3/8 inch larger volume lines. I put one extra air coupler, the one at the back, and then the one that goes in the engine service bay, and that now is a 3/8 inch line, because now you can actually use it for something. I mean, as a 1/4 inch line, it was useless. It did nothing. Plus it put water. Who would put water inside your tires, right? So anyway, and the other one that goes to the pack brake, and then 2 go to the blue lines go to the airbags, one's for the front and one's for the rear. The air horn, the purple lines are 1/4 inch lines, are small lines, and one goes to the air horns, one goes to the slide for controlling the passenger step. That's a door that slides back and forth in front of the passenger seat. One line goes to the dash, and one line I left as a spare at the bottom, and there's 2 lines I don't know where they go. Now this thing does use, as far as I understand from the manual and the chassis, it uses a air assist for the steering and maybe for the brakes. I'm not sure on that one, but I could not trace the lines, or I didn't have the energy to do it after this time. So I just made sure they didn't leak. I checked the leak down on it, it was fine. So I did not pursue it further than to just recognize that they're there. I would have expected them to use larger lines, so I'm uncertain as to their final destination. The orange line at the bottom is a 3/8 inch line that goes to the emergency brake up to the driver's console, where you pull that lever up or down to set the brake and release the brake. And that of course goes to the drive shaft. So that's how the thing is as built now. And here's a picture of the manifold. I've just tie wrapped it in there for the present. I have to make a bracket and weld a bracket, mount it, and so forth, but it's fine like this. It's probably better than a lot of the work that was done prior on this coach. So you can see the large line coming off the left and top, and some of these lines go to these 2 couplers that I spoke to you about. off the bottom is a better view of the tank from the back. You can see now it's just a single line going off the bottom. The reason that one at the back is the 3/8 inch line is simply because that's the only connector I had to fit the tank at the time. But it doesn't hurt anything, it drains fast. The one at the front drain is the standard 3/4, and again I used a right angle coupler there, and there's no T connections now on the front. Here's what it looks like from the rear. This is where I fed the system that charged the tank. The wires that are cut off there, that's another contribution by the RV lot that had this thing. They just cut the controller for the trailer off. I guess they wanted to sell it for $10 or something. So anyway, that's what that is. That's another topic for another time. Also, I'd like to be able to use this possibly to run an air brake system on if I tow my truck. Here it is mounted. You can see that the T connections now are on the top. And what I did on the top was instead of going at the back where these less than brilliant people had put the discharge for the T line, I plugged that and brought the T line to the front. So now it goes into the tank at the back on the wet side, comes out of the tank on the dry side, goes through the filter, and then back out and into this manifold system that you see here. So that dries all of the air for what I consider to be the essential components. And this little dryer will handle a great deal, I think it's 15 cubic feet of air, and it seems to work fine, you know. And what I also did here was put onto this dryer that you can see just the connection so I can read the air pressure in the service bay. There was a hand towel cleaner, whatever it is, and there actually was some hand towels in there, but I never use it for that. So I took that out, cut a piece of plastic, plexiglass, mounted this on the plexiglass in the engine bay, service bay, and it works pretty good. So that's the whole thing. The thing still leaks down. If it's left, I think it's leaking back through the governor on the compressor a certain amount. I checked all the lines. Some had a bit of leak down on it. None of the 1/4 inch lines had any leak on it that I could determine. The airbags leaked down a bit, but that could be because of how the leveling controls sit when it's sitting on the pad and the jacks are down and all this stuff. I don't know. But it doesn't really cause a problem for the system to drive it. So that's it. If you want to leave a comment, you don't have to say it's good or bad or whatever, but if you want to put something in the comments on the place where you put comments on there, then it'll give me an idea. If you have some other thing you'd like to see ahead of whatever I post next, I'll consider doing that. So thank you.